And I see some of our colleagues here, and Dr. Weber and Ms. Burke has joined us too. Did you want to say anything quickly, any of you? Doesn't look like it. Okay, great. Well, let's move to our first panel because that's who we're really here to hear from. We'll first bring up our Natasha Collins from the Legislative Analyst Office, Donna Wyatt from the California Department of Education, and Amber Alexander and Lisa Mazinski from the Department of Finance. And there is an LAO handout. I believe it's in your packet. And you may proceed when ready. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Natasha Collins from the Legislative Analyst Office. We've been asked to provide a broad overview of high school career technical education that's going to build upon the October 2nd hearing that you all participated in. We're going to be providing that overview. Then we'll be providing an overview of the governor's proposal and other CTE proposals, as well as some comments. As the chair mentioned, you'll be needing to look at a handout that we provided beforehand entitled Overview of Career Technical Education. I'm going to start on the first page, which shows the 15 industry sectors that the California Department of Education has designated for career technical education. High schools really organize their CTE around these industry areas, which range from manufacturing to information technology and arts and media. Within each industry area, the CDE, that is the Department of Education, has developed model curriculum standards that high school programs follow in order to qualify as a high-quality CTE program. Turning to page 2, we note that in offering CTE at high schools, there are several objectives, and here are the 4 primary objectives that we've identified. First, to promote student engagement and oftentimes to teach academic subjects in a hands-on way. Second, to teach technical skills to students. Third, to teach soft skills such as communication and team building. And fourth, to help meet state workforce needs. It's one of the state workforce plan's goals to provide more middle-skilled workers, and CTE in high schools oftentimes has an objective to do that. Moving to page 3, we provide information about the state's approach to funding CTE at high schools over time. Prior to the local control funding formula, the state supported CTE through various categorical programs. Those are earmarked programs for specific purposes, in this case, career technical education. The largest of these earmarked programs was the ROCP, also known as the Regional Occupational Centers and Programs, at about $400 million annually. When the state transitioned to the local control funding formula in 2013-14, categorical program funding, including ROCP, that funding was largely eliminated and rolled into the new formula, which provided a notably higher base rate for high school programs in recognition of the higher costs of programs like career technical education and other college preparedness programs. While the ROCP program was rolled in, several smaller categorical CTE programs were not. They stayed outside of the LCFF. The state originally intended to phase in LCFF funding over several years as state revenues increased, with the original projection of meeting full funding in 2021. The state funded several transitional programs during this time as it moved towards that full funding. First, in addition to rolling the ROCP funds into the new formula, those that were receiving those funds were required for 2 years to keep spending that money on CTE programs in their districts. After that, the state adopted the CCPT, the Career Pathways Trust, which was $500 million over 2 years, and then the CTE Incentive Grant, which you heard about a bit earlier, which was a 3-year, $900 million program, which provided funding through 2017-18, so this current year. The CTE Incentive Grant decreased state funding as it increased a local match requirement at the same time. Moving to page 4, you'll see the state's approach to accountability under the LCFF for career technical education. Currently, school districts are required to discuss with their communities how they'll engage students in a variety of areas, including career and technical education. They do this through their local control and accountability plan, which is a state-required strategic plan districts are required to submit. To incentivize schools to serve students in the best way possible, and also to signal to the state if schools need help improving, the state requires districts to report on student outcomes on a number of areas, including college and career readiness. This data is displayed on a public website known as the school dashboard. If schools do not do well on dashboard indicators, they will need to assess the root causes of their performance issues and access support to improve. Outcome data displayed on the school dashboard in 2017 was the first year that we saw the college and career readiness indicator. What it indicated was that 50% of California students were deemed college and career prepared, 25 were deemed not prepared, and 25% were deemed approaching prepared. If you look on page 5 of your handout, you'll see a figure in which we walk through the indicator and the different metrics that are involved in calculating it. You'll see the prepared, approaching prepared, and not prepared on this graphic. I would note that the State Board of Education has indicated that they intend to add a well-prepared indicator that would include more metrics of CTE, including the number of students that participated in work-based learning and acquired certificates. On page 6, we provide a brief overview of the governor's 2018-19 CTE proposal, although the administration will provide greater detail on this proposal later in this panel. The governor proposes to allow the CTE incentive grant to sunset in the current year and instead to provide the Community College Chancellor's Office with $212 million in ongoing funding for high school CTE through the community college's Strong Workforce program. Strong Workforce is a program that funds 8 regional consortia which develop and implement plans designed to meet their regional workforce needs. Of the $212 million proposed for high schools to become a part of this regional approach to CTE, $200 million would be for direct services for CTE at high schools. Regions would receive the funds based on their share of statewide ADA. I note inaccuracy in our handout. It's not just high school ADA, it's 7 through 12 ADA. That would be one component of determining how much regions receive. It also would be determined based on the number of job openings and the unemployment rate in that school district's region. From there, after we determine the funding amount for each of the regions, the consortia would determine through a competitive basis which school districts would receive the money in order to offer workforce-aligned CTE. The school districts would also be required to provide a 1-to-2 match for the funding. I would just emphasize that districts could only use their funding from this program to offer CTE courses that are in the industry areas that are aligned with their Strong Workforce regional plans. The remaining $12 million would be for 72 pathway coordinators that would work with school districts to help them coordinate programs with their Strong Workforce plans, as well as provide technical assistance to those programs. I would also note that the governor proposes to fully fund the local control funding formula 2 years ahead of schedule in the budget year. This would equate to $9,200 as the high school base rate, which is about $3,000 more than the per pupil high school base rate when we began LCFF in 2013-14. On page 7, we provide our assessment of the governor's proposal. We raised concerns with the governor's proposal to create a K-12 CTE categorical program despite LCFF being fully funded and the use of the college and career readiness indicator beginning in 2017. Under LCFF, every high school is expected to provide college and career readiness to students. We have concerns that moving back to a categorical approach could be a signal that CTE is viewed as an add-on to the core high school experience rather than a part of it. In addition, we have concerns that the governor's proposal defines CTE too narrowly. High school CTE has various goals in addition to meeting regional workforce needs. Lastly, we have concerns that the proposal does not include several of the other categorical programs that still exist outside of the LCFF. When compared to the CTE incentive grant, we think the incentive grant approach has a few advantages over the governor's proposal. First, it provides high schools with more flexibility to offer CTE in industry areas, not only those that are aligned with their regional workforce needs. Second, the program is overseen by the California Department of Education, which has greater expertise in CTE curriculum standards and high school CTE overall. Page 8 of your handout describes AB 1743, which proposes to extend the CTE incentive grant for 3 additional years and increase funding. Specifically, it would provide $500 million annually to schools to provide high-quality CTE and would require a 1-to-1 match. The funding would be intended as transitional funding to full implementation of LCFF and the final development of the College and Career Readiness Indicator. The bill also establishes performance requirements that would require programs to be deemed successful by the CDE in order to continue to receive funding. It adds several other requirements, such as providing opportunities to students with disabilities and to student CTE organizations. Page 9 outlines our recommendations to the legislature with regard to moving forward with CTE. We believe there are many benefits to the local control funding formula approach. The formula is fully funded in the budget year. We've had 5 years of transitional funding, and we have College and Career Readiness Indicator. For this reason, we recommend that the legislature take the LCFF approach, and we believe that if the legislature has concerns, instead of creating a categorical program, it can address those concerns in other ways. For example, if the concern is that not enough funding is provided to high schools to offer CTE, the legislature can revisit the high school funding amount. If the concern is that there's not strong enough incentives through the accountability that we currently have, we think the legislature could revisit accountability, and we have some ideas to share if that is an interest of the committees. However, if the legislature does wish to take the categorical approach to CTE, we recommend taking the CTE incentive grant approach with some modifications that bring in some of the coordination that the governor suggests. Specifically, we believe that aligning a portion of the CTE funding to workforce needs, but not all of it, could help with alignment between community colleges and K-12 CTE programs. We also believe that requiring the CDE and the community colleges to share data and accountability could strengthen coordination. For example, by requiring K-12 and community colleges to link data such that we could see when a student leaves high school, if they enter a CTE program, if they're remediated, and how well they perform after that stage. To further coordinate, we recommend rolling in the outstanding categorical programs that are still outside of the LCFF into any new categorical program to reduce administrative burden and provide a more streamlined approach. So that the legislature can revisit in future years to see if this program is meeting its goals, we recommend the legislature consider making the program limited term and setting very clear data expectations as well as targets for schools. In that way, the legislature could come back in several years and evaluate whether it's meeting the goals that were put forth. For funding the program, we think the legislature needs to consider the trade-offs of how much funding to provide. Funding that goes towards a categorical program is funding that may not be available for other priorities or for the local control funding formula. We think the legislature could consider setting the amount at a rate that signals to school districts that this program is supplemental to the LCFF that they're spending on CTE and not the core funding source for CTE. With that, I conclude my comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Let's hear from Ms. Donna Wyatt from the California Department of Education. We'll finish the panel, then we'll have questions.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Donna Wyatt, Director of the Career and College Transition Division at the California Department of Education. I'm going to speak to you today about some of the outcomes that we're seeing under the CTIG incentive grant, and then also the direction of K through 12 career technical education. Much of the information that I'm going to present today was actually put together by the 7 CTIG technical assistance centers, and many of the leaders are behind me today. The list of awardees of the Career Technical Education Incentive Grant, or CTIG, will be published during the March State Board of Education meeting. The third and final round of CTIG saw a total of 393 grant applications, with 13 of those being new applicants and 380 being grant renewals. During the grant period of 2015 through 2018, the request for funds totaled just under $965 million. Enrollment numbers for CTE programs under the 3 years of CTIG has increased 12%. CTE enrollment has increased over 22% since 2011-12. In 2016-17, 55% of high school students were enrolled in CTE programs, with information and communications technology, manufacturing, engineering, hospitality, tourism, and public services showing the largest growth during CTIG. Under CTIG, schools have been able to create and expand CTE programs driven by student interest, current regional and statewide labor market data, industry advocacy, and in alignment with programs offered at their local community college districts. K-12 CTE is unique from CTE programs offered in community college in 4 key ways. First, they emphasize the integration of general education content and curriculum with CTE content and curriculum. Courses are based on the CTE model curriculum standards, which were adopted by the State Board of Education in 2013. Student leadership through career technical student organizations are integral to CTE student outcomes, and students are provided with a continuum of work-based learning experiences through their CTE course sequences. Our early data shows us that the majority of CTIG funds were used for these very purposes. CTIG funds were used to bring K-12 CTE programs up to current industry standards and equipment, with capital outlay dollars being used for state-of-the-art equipment like ultrasound machines for veterinary and animal husbandry ag ed programs, ambulance simulators for emergency medicine and health science programs, and laser cutters for manufacturing programs, to name just a few. For most programs, this was the first significant investment in industry standard equipment since the recession and categorical flex of 08 through 10. Districts also reported that CTIG funds were spent on CTE-specific professional development, as well as college and career counselors. Perhaps the most exciting achievement of CTIG is that the majority of districts reported to us that CTE is now embedded in their LCAP, and their districts have a renewed interest and commitment to CTE. They report that the California Career Pathways Trust, CTIG, and now the College Career Indicator have been instrumental in this change. While grant recipients participated in CTIG reported that their districts were committed to high-quality CTE, they did express concern about their ability to maintain industry-standard equipment and continuing dedicated CTE professional development without CTIG dollars. With CTIG, the CDE established 7 county offices of education as regional technical assistance providers. The 7 centers were chosen for their leadership and expertise in the delivery of K-12 CTE. These 7 centers provided technical assistance and professional development based on the unique regional and statewide needs of K-12 CTE, including the model curriculum standards, integration of general ed courses and CTE content, project-based learning, and college and career pathway development as defined in the state plans for both Perkins and ESSA. In addition to the professional development provided by these county TA centers, the Career and College Transition Division at the California Department of Education has provided additional support by dedicating 4 division staff as regional support to our CT leaders in the field who have the responsibility of Perkins grant management. The division also provides professional development and mentoring for up-and-coming CTE leaders through our CTE Leadership Institute. Division staff has collaborated with our CTE colleagues in the Educational Data and Management Division to provide statewide professional development on upgrades to CalPads, the California Longitudinal Pupil Data System. We are also working very closely with staff from the Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Division on the expansion of career indicators for the statewide College Career Indicator. And most frequently, we've been collaborating with CDE colleagues in facilities and transportation to support school districts through the new CTE Facilities Program application. Listening to, being responsive to, and prioritizing the needs of those we serve is the #1 priority of the Career and College Transition Division at the CDE. In 2018 and beyond, we're prioritizing CTE middle school expansion through a pilot grant program for 10 middle school CTE programs that align to our California Partnership Academies. We're currently working on a 3 to 5 year plan for expansion of middle school CTE, and we expect to publish the announcement for those grants in mid-March. And early response from the field is very, very encouraging. As of 2013, there were over 400 California Partnership Academies in the state. The CPA model has over 30 years of proven success, with CPA students outperforming non-CPA students in graduation rates, UCA through G rates, higher GPA, higher entry-level wages, and higher college-going rates. CPAs focus on the integration of general education and CTE content within specific industry sectors, and they provide a series of work-based learning experiences that allow students to try on careers through their interaction with industry professionals. CPA students are also supported by a cohort of teachers and counselors dedicated to their success. Pre-apprenticeship is another high priority. And under the direction of State Superintendent of Public Instruction Tom Torlakson, division staff has met with leading labor union officials in the state, as well as state leaders in the construction industry, to develop a plan for the expansion of pre-apprenticeship programs to address the demand for skilled labor in our state. Currently, there are 8 pre-apprenticeship programs operating under the CPA model, and we plan to expand those with the support of our labor and industry professionals. In 2017, the California Workforce Pathways Advisory Committee was convened to begin addressing the requirement for a new state CTE plan pending the authorization of Perkins. This advisory committee is composed of members of the California State Board of Education and the California Community College Board of Governors. In addition to this advisory committee, staff from the Career and College Transition Division at the CDE and staff from the Workforce and Economic Development Office at the Community College Chancellor's Office continue to work, wrong page, in defining the elements of high-quality college and career pathways, including work-based learning, career readiness aptitudes, early college opportunities, and student support. On a regional level, school districts and community college continue the good work that started under the California Career Pathways Trust. They continue to create bridges across the two systems to create dual enrollment and articulation agreements and the alignment of college and career pathways across K through 12 and community college. In conclusion, with the implementation of the statewide college career indicator, there is unprecedented demand for K through 12 CTE programs. While this is exciting, it's also daunting, and our challenge is to ensure that CTE programs meet the standards of high-quality CTE and ensure that all K through 12 CTE programs allow our students to explore their career interests and to prepare for both entry-level employment as well as post-secondary education and training. The choice should be up to our students and their families. Our job is to ensure that students leave our schools prepared to take advantage of the full range of career and post-secondary options available to them. I want to thank you for your time and attention and for your support of K through 12 career technical education.
Thank you, Ms. Wyatt. I just do want to note the presence of Assemblymember Cervantes, Marisucci, Baker has joined, Ms. Baker has joined us, Mr. McCarty, and Mr. Berman has joined us as well. I don't think I've been to an informational hearing in this Capitol ever where there's been this many members of the Assembly. So I think that shows the interest in this effort. So I think we're at a good spot. With that, we're going to hear from Ms. Amber Alexander and Lisa Mazinski from the Department of Finance. And I apologize if I did not say that last name correctly. You can correct me when you are up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. Amber Alexander with the Department of Finance. Building off the LAO's high-level summary of the governor's proposal, I'm going to take my time to delve a little bit deeper into some of the specific elements of the proposal to establish a K-12 specific component within the Strong Workforce Program. The administration's proposal is built to ensure that opportunities for students to explore and select pathways into middle-skill careers continue after the end of the CTE incentive grant. As a reminder, the CTE incentive grant was designed as a short-term transition program to help districts cover the costs of CTE while the Local Control Funding Formula, or LCFF, was being phased in. The LCFF base grant amount includes a 2.6% adjustment for grades 9 through 12, which is intended to account for the higher cost of providing CTE programs at the high school level. Assuming full implementation in 18-19, this base grant adjustment will amount to approximately $430 million in ongoing funding that has been built into the LCFF base that can be used to support robust CTE programs to the extent that those programs are a local priority. While the administration still contends that funding allocated through the LCFF should pay for a full range of educational costs, including CTE, the governor's budget includes $200 million ongoing Proposition 98 funding to provide an extra incentive for local educational agencies to offer high-quality CTE programs that are aligned with needed industry skills and regional workforce development efforts occurring through the existing Strong Workforce Program. Under the governor's proposal, the Chancellor's Office of the California Community Colleges will allocate funding to the 8 existing Strong Workforce regional consortia based on a formula that takes into account the region's unemployment rate, projected job openings, and 7 through 12 average daily attendance. Each regional consortia will then administer a competitive grant process to distribute their portion of the funding to eligible local educational agencies in their region. Grant determinations will be made by a subcommittee formed by the consortium made up of individuals with expertise in K-12 education and workforce development. This subcommittee will work in consultation with the consortium to decide the specific funding amounts for each grant award. Similar to the CTE incentive grant program, the funding allocated to each consortium will be separated into 3 pots for small, medium, and large applicants based on their average daily attendance. In order to be eligible for funding, applicants must be a member of the consortium and be participating in the regional workforce efforts to align workforce employment and education services, be utilizing their region's plan to inform their efforts to implement or expand upon CTE programs, provide a local match for any funding received from the program, and meet certain minimum eligibility standards, the majority of which were lifted from the existing CTE incentive grant program requirements. So why has the administration structured the proposal this way, rather than continuing to provide funding to the Department of Education to administer a K-12 specific CTE program? Like you, we've been listening to feedback and comments made at the various hearings over the past few years, and we've heard several comments being consistently made. First, we heard that the approach of providing one-time or limited-term grants to support CTE is not sustainable. Administrators said that they have struggled to plan CTE programs through short-term grant opportunities, like the CTE Incentive Grant and the Career Pathways Trust Program. In response, the governor's proposal establishes an ongoing and sustainable funding stream for regionally aligned CTE programs. Secondly, we agree with those who have stated that workforce development is a regional issue. Comments have been made about investing as a state in a regional model to support CTE, a model that will bring industry and the business community to the table to inform education. We heard concerns that despite past efforts to integrate K-12 CTE programs with industry and community college course offerings, programs aren't always feeding seamlessly together. The governor's budget proposal seeks to address this issue by utilizing a regional infrastructure that already exists under the Strong Workforce Program. This structure is predicated on the notion that California's local educational agencies, community colleges, universities, workforce development boards, and economic development and industry leaders should collaborate to inform the offerings of CTE courses and programs in their region. The Strong Workforce Program has expanded the availability of regionally aligned CTE programs at the community college level. And we believe that these benefits will only be further enhanced by extending the pipeline of this program into the K-12 community. Industry has consistently been bringing up the need to offer relevant CTE programs that will actually prepare students for a career upon graduation. The governor's budget proposal is intentionally focused on providing incentives for those local educational agencies that are offering CTE programs that are aligned to industry needs in their region. As a result, we believe that these programs will better prepare students to meet industry workforce needs. Finally, we've heard calls for the state to put in place a regional leadership structure to assist teachers and industry partners in implementing high-quality CTE programs. The governor's budget proposal does this by providing $12 million in ongoing Proposition 98 funding to put in place 72 K-12 workforce pathway coordinators, whose duties would include providing technical assistance and support to local educational agencies in implementing or expanding upon their aligned CTE programs. This would also include cultivating collaboration between local educational agencies and industry to further strengthen industry involvement at the K-12 level. The governor's budget proposal has been carefully crafted to preserve key elements of the CTE incentive grant program, continuing to focus on high-quality CTE programs and maintaining the local match requirement to ensure that funding provided through the program is being granted to LEAs that are also committed to investing their own local resources into their programs. The governor's budget proposal includes the same outcome reporting metrics that were part of the CTE incentive grant program. However, data will be reported through the California Community Colleges Launch Board data system, which has the capabilities to show how students progress through educational institutions and into the workforce. By focusing on industry-driven, workforce-aligned CTE programs, the governor's budget proposal puts in place a strong career technical education framework that ensures that regional workforce development planning efforts transcend across K-12 and the community colleges, ultimately guiding students down a pathway that can actually lead them into a livable wage job. I have with me Lisa Brzezinski, also from Department of Finance, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Thank you to our first panel. We'll have questions now for our first panel. I have a few. I'll kind of go quick because I know there's other questions, and there are other panels after this. For the LAO, if you will. You made the point that high school CTE or even middle school, high school CTE has goals beyond workforce preparation. Could you expand on that a bit?
Sure. So I believe the Department of Education mentioned the fact that many high schools use CTE as a way to teach academic subjects. So we've seen more and more CTE courses qualifying for meeting A through G requirements, for example. CTE courses can be used to teach academic content in a hands-on way. In addition to the technical skills that you mentioned, CTE is often used as a student engagement strategy as well to keep students engaged in high school in providing them coursework in an area that they have interest in, providing them with an opportunity to explore different types of career paths that they might take in the future. We've also heard that CTE and research really indicates that CTE can teach students soft skills, such as teamwork, communication, showing up on time, building resumes, providing some of those soft skills that we know that employers and even if students are going to four-year universities really benefits them.
Great, thank you. And I agree that these programs engage students. I agree they have academic crossover. Listen, I didn't really understand my fractions, so I had to go out and work construction. I had to use a measuring tape, right, and had to really learn what the difference between 5/8 and 7/8. I could apply it in the classroom, but to apply it in the real world is much different. That's what I think CTE programs do. But let me offer you a concern of mine, and you can respond to that. My concern is that we might start tracking students in 7th grade, right? This is almost the German model, right? We start in 7th grade. You pick your lane. Are you going to do CTE? Or are you going to go to a university? And I want students to be prepared for both, for sure. But I also want them to have options for both and not to lock themselves in for the rest of their life in 7th grade. Because I remember my world as a 7th grader. It wasn't too broad, right? Could you comment on that?
I think that the state and the legislature have had concerns with tracking students, and that's one of the reasons that the state has moved towards more of the model. I think we call it many times career pathways or a linked learning model, where students are able to, where the goal has really been for students to be college and career ready, where they would have an option to attend a four-year university or join the workforce or enroll in a training program after high school. For that very reason, we want to make sure that certain types of students aren't nudged into certain
pathways.
Tracking. Essentially has been a concern, and I think that the steps through the LCFF and the College and Career Readiness Indicator was an attempt to address that.
Great. Thank you. Next question is for the Department of Finance. I very much appreciate that the governor's seen the need for more CTE funding with $200 million on an ongoing basis. not just saying, hey, for 3 years, we're going to do this, and then we're going to give up on it. So I think that's very important. The one major challenge I have with this proposal, and you probably know, is the consortia. That to me is like the Soviet bloc. I don't know how people are going to get their money, how they're going to get it fairly. It's handed over to the community colleges, which is a very poor precedent in my mind, that we would give them, I don't know if they have the capacity to do this. Why wouldn't keep this in the Department of Education? I'm still curious. And if there are challenges in the Department of Education, let's address those. But again, we hand it over to the community colleges, and then they hand it down to the local consortia. And my concern is also at the local consortia level. It's handed down to the consortia, I think, on an ADA basis, but it's not handed out by the consortia on an ADA basis, if I'm correct. So can you explain how that is supposed to work and how it's going to be fair, that districts won't get outvoted at the local level, et cetera?
There was a lot in your question, so I'll try, and if I miss anything, feel free to
As efficient as you can.
remind me.
I appreciate it.
So the approach to provide funding to the Community College Chancellor's Office, they're really allocating the funding down to the consortium based on a calculated formula. So it wouldn't necessarily matter if the Department of Education was calculating that formula or whether the Chancellor's Office was calculating that formula. The formula will be what it is based on the unemployment rate in the region, the projected job openings in the 7 through 12 ADA. At the consortia level is really where the decisions on how that funding is getting dispersed to the LEAs, that's really where it's going to happen, is down at the consortia level. And currently, the consortia are working very closely with their industry partners in their region to make sure that the community college offerings in their area are aligned to industry needs. And we anticipate that collaboration will continue as the funding for this program gets allocated, really with the intention of making sure that the K-12 programs that are being funded through this through this proposal are meeting industry needs in that area and are driven by workforce demand in that area. So the subcommittee is one of the components that we've established to really try and help mitigate some of the concerns that community colleges would be making these decisions on behalf of the K-12s in their area. This subcommittee is made up of experts with a K-12 expertise and workforce development in their areas. So we are working with the Chancellor's Office now and getting some calls set up with some of the regional consortia to figure out how best to integrate K-12 into that process without disrupting the current structure. But really our goal is that these programs will be made down at the local level where regional workforce demands are most known to industry in that area, and really getting them to inform the K-12 offerings.
Great. So if I'm a district and I've got 9 other districts in my consortia, and one of them is very large, might it be that I would get outvoted and I wouldn't get any of that money?
So we do have the language in the trailer bill that establishes basically pot sizes. So there's some set aside within each consortia's allocation for smalls, medium, and larges, specifically to address that concern that the smalls would maybe be squeezed out by some of the larger.
Small school district or small school?
It's based on ADA. So if you're applying as a JPA, it's your combined ADA. If you're applying as a single school district, then it's your district's ADA.
So it's by ADA of the district, not
Yes.
the school site.
No. Yeah, because you're applying as a school district or county office or charter school or JPA.
Okay. I still have significant, I don't understand why we design a system because we don't want it to go to the Department of Education. That's what it strikes me as, because you're saying, well, we want to give it to the community colleges because they're aligned with the local work. I'm just a little confused on why you just wouldn't keep it in the Department of Education. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. So I think we need to get away from the mindset that it's actually the Chancellor's Office making these decisions, because really they're passing the funding down to the regional consortium level. They're not involved in the decision-making process once it gets down to that consortium level. It has nothing to do with whether or not the Department of Education is capable of making that calculation. It's really based on the fact that this is an existing structure that the Community College Chancellor's Office has in place. 2 of the 3 factors, the unemployment rate and the projected job openings in the region, are calculations that are already in the community college formula. So the Department of Education will just be providing the ADA. And ultimately, our goal was to get the funding down to the consortia in the most efficient manner. And we felt like providing it directly to the Chancellor's Office, who already has this structure in place, is most efficient.
Okay. And I think we need to think broader than just workforce development. We need to think about human development here too. And it might be that a student is in a middle school or high school and they have a pathway program that might not be at the local community college, but might be somewhere else they want to go. And that still might be a fit for that local school, but they might not go to their very local community college. So I hope we think about that too. But I don't want to get too far into that today because I know others have questions here. But I'm real concerned about how this money gets down on the ground, the accountability of the ground. I'd prefer something like a Navigator model, and the governor has $12 million in there. My hope would be the Navigators would be around the state and not located in Sacramento, so that they would act, we'd be cut into regions, and they would act as the local expert on how best to connect districts to local job needs, regional job needs. Again, not relying on people sitting in an office in Sacramento, but take that $12 million, spread it across the state and regions, and they would do the same thing that this whole consortia thing would do. So I'm a little concerned about that. It just seems a little unwieldy to me. Okay, and I know Mr. McCarty had a couple questions.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, it's great to see the broad interest for committees. Roughly maybe 25% of the assembly, I think, is participating in this. Shows how big of an interest we have in this. And I know we're going to get in great detail in the budget committee, so I won't bore everybody here with the details. But just kind of the big picture, certainly we're on the bubble the last few years as far as funding for this throughout California. The one-time money, 400, the 300, then 200. So it's a relief that we have an ongoing amount now. Granted, the dollar amount could be debated. I do have great concerns with the LAO proposal as far as having the districts with their increased LCFF money pick and choose this, because they have so many other priorities. They have their pension costs, their STIRS costs, teacher salaries, basically getting over from the Great Recession. So I don't think this will necessarily be a priority, which we want it to be, unless we say this is going to be a priority, which is why I think it's important what we're doing here today. So I think that there's two questions as far it's really how much money are we going to put in the pot, and then how will it be doled out across the state of California. So the dollar amount, that's a good start, 212 ongoing. I think there's desire to go north of there, and certainly we'll probably push that in our budget process in the Assembly. I am in line with Mr. O'Donnell as far as the implementation of this. I'm not quite certain as far as why we're picking this model versus the past 3 years. But another issue that I want to raise, which hasn't been brought up yet, is the fact that we have 1,000 high schools in California, right? And some kids and parents, they can vote with their feet. They can go across the district, across the town, but sometimes maybe that's your school. You have no other choice. Maybe you're in a rural area. Well, maybe you're in an urban area, and you're going to go to that school because that's where your parents or whoever want you to focus. And you could be out of luck because the consortia may not have your high school participating. So in the old model, where it was a categorical, every student had an opportunity to participate. I remember I did my metal shop class when I was in high school. And so it's different now. We want to pick the programs which we think makes the most sense. But how can we ensure that, based upon what Mr. O'Donnell said, that not just the economic needs for the industry, but the human needs for a kid who wants to be able to make a go of this? How do we ensure that they're able to participate and they won't get left behind?
Sure. So the 8 existing strong workforce regional consortia, those cover the entire state. So every LEA will fall within one of the 8 existing regional consortia. No LEA will be left out. The extent to which that LEA chooses to engage in that consortia, that is ultimately up to them. This provides an incentive. We're hoping to get them further involved. We know currently LEAs are involved in these consortia. They're not just community college consortia right now. Some LEAs are participating, and some are even receiving funding through the existing Strong Workforce Program through the pot that's reserved for regionally prioritized projects. We actually think that this approach will further collaboration at the local level. So if there is a program that's not necessarily offered at your particular school, we think that these will lead to conversations where districts and other LEAs in the region are talking and are collaborating on making sure that courses are offered to students in their area. We think it will lead to further collaboration between LEAs and community colleges for things that, possibly for use of facilities to the extent that a district doesn't have facilities available to offer a certain class. So we do think that this proposal will actually expand access rather than restricting.
So I'm not quite sure how that would work if you're an individual student. In the interim, do you have to transfer to a different school, or do you have to wait until your area gets it together and comes to you? Will it be 4 years and you're left out and that generation is lost?
So if you're an individual student now and there's a course that you're interested in that's not being offered, we do have the LCAP process where you can bring those concerns through that process. And if you get enough support locally, maybe that is a class that will ultimately be offered on your campus. In terms of making sure that that student is aware of other opportunities in their area, that's one of the duties of the K-12 workforce pathway coordinators that we're creating. And the reason that we've created 72 is to make sure that they are accessible to LEAs and to individual schools and to students within those schools, and making sure that schools and students know of available programs in their region, and really making sure that they're fully aware of other opportunities out there.
Thank you.
Great. Next, we'll go to Mr. Gibson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The chairman has already asked me to be nice. I'm going to be nice, so thank you very much for that. Let me simply strongly suggest that I represent a 6-ports district in the state of California. The people who I represent can't wait. Can't wait. We have to get it right the first time. And so I'm very concerned and align my comments with what my colleagues have already articulated. We have to get it right the first time, like right now. And putting money into this program for districts to take advantage of it or not is troubling to me. It's troubling to me in terms of, this is a great program. And again, people choose not to go to high school. Not go to a 4-year college or a junior college. They want a job after they finish high school, and they have to have the technical skills in order to sustain themselves as an adult. Father Boyle of Homeboy Bakery said, "Give a man a job, stop a bullet." Mm-hmm. That's real in my community in which I represent. I can see the decrease by giving individuals a job, but technical skills that they can get a job that can sustain themselves through life. And so, I think there's a great interest by my colleagues being here and the room being full to show that we need to have something where it's not being appropriated every so often. Why not have something that's across the entire state of California in education, K through 12, where career technical education. Do you remember the time when, you may be too young, but I remember the time when I was going to school, I had offered in junior high school the shops. Mm-hmm. And then it carried on to high school. And a number of my classmates opened up their own auto mechanic shops. They went into plumbing. They went into jobs right now that's providing a way of life for them and their families. And those are the things that we need to try to continue to do right now with emerging technology here in California. And so my question is, when we talk about, following the money, how do we follow the funds that's to ensure equitable distribution, including disadvantaged communities? Because what you described to Mr. McCartney's question, I have concerns about.
Sure. So the governor's proposal really does take a regional approach. So ultimately, the accountability is going to be coming from the regional consortium and making sure that that regional consortium is getting the outcomes that they were hoping to achieve in making the investments into the
based on a tiered
community.
system as you described, system you described, some can and some won't based on, school district needs and things of that nature.
So we can't compel districts to participate in this program, just like we did not require them to participate in the CTE incentive grant program. We make the opportunity available, and ultimately that district is the one making the decision on whether or not to apply to under our program or under a CTE incentive grant program.
So if a school district decides, I want everybody to go to college, and I'm not going to offer the CTE program, but, you have kids there who are not going to go to college, whether it's a community college or a four-year college. So what happens to those kids? Aren't they important as well?
They certainly are. And our accountability system does have the college career indicator in place. And I think really that is our way of compelling districts to be held accountable for offering these types of courses. But again, ultimately, we're not requiring them to participate in any one particular CTE program that we're offering. We do hope that they see the value in doing that, and we expect that in investing these programs, they will see increased student outcomes in the area of pupil achievement and school climate. But again, that's not something that we're compelling them to do.
I'll stop there.
Thank you. Mr. Frazier, who himself comes from the construction industry and knows this issue well.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to just kind of capitalize on what you had talked about, fractions in real life. I had hundreds of apprentices come out of high school who were not qualified to even start working for me based on not having the ability to go through the CTE or vocational ed that I had. I didn't have the opportunity to go to college. I went into an apprenticeship program right after because I knew I had an aptitude to go and be somewhat competent going forward. A lot of kids come out of high school, they go into the workforce, they don't have this training, and they're embarrassed because they can't be helpful, and they're a burden to the employer, and they give up. They absolutely do give up. And so then they kind of flounder around looking for a place. And I think the chair has demonstrated that we need to be able to give the opportunity to these young individuals, and they become infatuated or impressed on what they can accomplish early in life and know that they can be successful at something. We identify with life skills for the special needs population, 18 to 22-year-olds. We give them everything that we can. We have Pell Grants, we have Cash for College, we have all of these things for the pathway to college. But you tell us that maybe 3 more years that we're going to look at this, where it was flat funded for CTE. It's imperative that we look at this as a opportunity for young people. I will tell you that as an employer, 500. I think that when the individuals came to me and they weren't prepared, that I failed them in some way, paying taxes, that they weren't getting the education that they needed to be successful. And so I implore all of you to make a conscious effort to make sure that these children have an opportunity. And it just, like I say, I can't thank the chair for bringing this up and being a co-author with him on his bill, because if we don't step up and we let districts determine outcomes, they're going to circumvent the process because they have a different perspective. And I think that it needs to be a mandate in the state. And I think, and you said you can't make a district comply to any kind of CT. We can, and we should. And so I'm looking forward to working with the chair going forward on that process, because I became an apprentice because of CTE or vocational ed, and then I became a master carpenter and a contractor, and now I'm a state legislator. And I am going to continue to champion this CTE until the day that I'm out of here. So I look forward to working with all of you. And I think we should start tracking performance metrics on what is accomplished through CTE and job retention because of it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Frazier, for your passion. Next, we'll hear from Ms. Quirk-Silva and then Dr. Weber after her.
Well, I appreciate getting both proposals, as you might say, and I know that there's a lot of work put into these. My major concern is, as we look at the community colleges, on the one model of moving the money down to a consortium, and then the consortium, in many cases, making the recommendations, and then the formula being ADA, strong workforce program, projected job growth. I feel like no matter which district you represent, and again, I represent Orange County, so much different than the Inland Empire, that we don't want to have winners and losers in this, which means that, if we do, as Mr. Gibson said, really focus on disadvantaged communities, and that would mean in many ways my district wouldn't have any opportunity to get funding. I also think that if you leave it up to individual school districts to either seek out the funding, apply for the grants, or be interested in this, some will and some won't. So you're going to also have that opportunity maybe taken because a district says this is not important to us, or we don't have the funds for it, or we can't compete with the grants. So, again, some districts have many more tools than others, whether they have hired a grant writer, whether they, and these are all little nuances, but when it comes down to funding, if somebody has more an advantage because they have a full-time grant writer on their staff, or if you have parents who are very vocal about whether it be theater arts or dance or sports, and they're pushing for that kind of emphasis on funding, they may not speak up about CTE. And again, if it seems as if they're not interested and they don't move forward with applying, again, we may have, it may not be the majority of students, but it may be if you have, 1,000 students and maybe 200 students that don't get served because they either don't know about programs, their parents aren't advocating for them, there could be no interest by the school board. So whatever model is chosen, I think as a body, we need to understand that there is a group of students out there that thrive in this type of setting. There is a group of students that leave high school and immediately want to go into some type of profession, whether it's a pre-nursing, whether, like you say, construction. And we have to have an alternative for them that is not the secondary alternative. It's kind of like, well, if we have money, we'll fund it. This has to be part of what we do because not everybody is going to go to a 2-year or a 4-year. And bottom line is we have very, very talented people that go into trades, that go into business models, and they succeed there. And we have many, many young students trying out the community colleges, sometimes for 5 and 6 years, kind of floundering, looking for where they're supposed to, and in many cases that they actually want to do electrical work, whatever that is, that skill or trade, but they've kind of been pushed into a different setting. So it's making sure that we really push that we keep, that there's some kind of fair advantage that does not eliminate a whole group of students from district to district.
Thank you. Next, Dr. Weber.
Yes, thank you very much, and I appreciate all of your comments and all of my colleagues' comments. It's almost as like this is a reliving of 5 years ago with local control funding formula, those who remember that. And some of the questions I think we have rest in the fact that that whole concept of LCFF was never fully completed because it never had a strong accountability document attached to it. Now, the dashboard is an effort to move in that direction, and probably CTE may have more data and more information in terms of accountability than some of the other indicators that we have to deal with academics and what have you in terms of what does that really mean. So I think it's a this is a process that it seems like we keep going through over and over because immediately after we did LCFF, people wanted to do categoricals again. And that's how CTE came into being, where people hated categoricals so long as it was taking out things they didn't like, but keeping in the things that they did like. So, so they're in a crisis of identity with regards to LCFF. We hear the wonders of LCFF, and then people start saying, but we're going to make you do this. And so that's the ongoing challenge if we don't specifically identify what we hope as an outcome for all students with regards to it, and how do we measure that in the various schools that are there, because otherwise you're going going to find yourself, because there are a number of issues that are coming forward real soon, whether it's special ed or something else, that we're going to find ourselves once again back in that categorical model where we say, okay, we need this, and since you didn't do it, we're going to make you do it. And so then we could develop a categorical and another categorical, and then we'll find ourselves with 30 categoricals like we did before on every issue you could possibly imagine, and then schools complaining that they don't have the flexibility to actually meet the needs of students and how those needs vary and so forth and so on. So I'm not as concerned probably as others, because I think at some point, as we talk about accountability, we will basically push that out. My greater concern is with the concept of CTE itself. And I think our chairman hit on it a minute ago, because whether we call it CTE or voc ed, whatever we want to call it, it has limitations for a person's life. Now, we look at it as having great opportunity, but oftentimes, unless it is something like link learning, and I don't know why we haven't moved to link learning rather than career technical education, because in those cases, you get strong academic foundation. And one of the things you learn in education is that the only real skills we have that will last for time is reading and math and computation. Because if you don't have good skills at that level, anything that you're trained to do is going to be short-lived, because it's going to change tomorrow with technology. There's going to be something new coming along as to how you measure something or what you put in place or how you develop something. And so if we're not equipping our students with really strong academic foundations that are measured and sometimes manifested in these various career options and choices, it's going to be short-lived. It's going to be like our old a voc ed program that most of you talk about how wonderful it was that you drilled holes and made ashtrays, but we don't do that anymore. And so as a result, regardless of, and when I say ashtrays, kids don't even know what I'm talking about nowadays, because no one has an ashtray anywhere. But so I'm wondering why we haven't moved our thinking toward more of a link learning model. I was at Link Learning's conference the other day in terms of, you're dealing with the career options, you're dealing with the soft skills, but you're also dealing with a strong academic foundation, so that when a student graduates, they're aware of all these careers and the career pathways, and they have this whole array of stuff that's available to them. And I think as long as we keep the terminology career tech education, we sometimes shortchange our knowledge. Oh, see, look what happened. Okay. We shortchange our knowledge of what we should be moving to in terms of what is out there, because I have a lot of kids who want to go into an apprenticeship program but they have such poor math skills that they can't qualify for a program. And that sounds absolutely horrible, but the standards are high now. And so we're not, if we keep the old model and we keep, a class here and a class here, rather than the integration of curriculum that happens in a linked learning environment, I think we shortchange our kids. And I don't think we're doing this wonderful career preparation stuff that we think we're moving into by constantly talking about it in this way, as a course here and a course there, rather than a whole way of thinking that exists on schools with regards to curriculum and the integration of that curriculum into the careers and the pathways and things like that, but also very strong foundations. We got away from voc ed because it was very limiting, and often it was, as our chair talked about, tracking certain kids in a pathway that they couldn't get out of, and they end up at the end of the line with very limited skills. They could work for that period of time because they were meeting the needs, but then when that profession changed or shifted, they didn't have the skills to shift with it. So I hope that our thinking gets bigger than where we are, that it really starts impacting the full curriculum, and that we really start talking about linked learning and how we link up these things. Those schools that have done linked learning have amazing results in terms of the young people and their options when they leave. And what they can do. And the world is changing so rapidly that those two skills, the computational skills and your literacy skills, are the two skills that work you through life right now. And most of our kids will change professions a zillion times. I am probably a dinosaur of anyone who ever had a profession for 40 years. There probably won't be many of those left in the world because our folks, the young people, are going to change so often. And they should have the skills to adapt and to change and to recreate themselves based on the interests that they have and based on the changing marketplace. So I'm just hoping that as we talk CTE, whatever, that we really move to something else, and that we don't see this as such a limited thing, but that it is really incorporated in all of the courses and the whole K-12 system that helps young people really define what they want to do in their life without limitations.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Burke.
So I would agree with Dr. Weber in that my mom always told me whatever I would end up doing, I probably haven't heard of today. And unfortunately, right now, she's wrong because I'm exactly where she started.
Unless you're a politician.
Yeah, right. Unless I'm an assembly member, whereas exactly she was when I was born. So that may not apply to me. But I agree with Dr. Weber in the fact that that probably applies to most young people. However, I will say I have to kind of go the other direction on the short-lived part of it. I think I come from a community that would be happy to have a certification that, although may not be permanent and may be slightly short-lived, and if that's 10 years or 15 years, would be thankful for the opportunity to start a life and to start a career. Sure. And so when I look at the fact that we have 100,000 jobs that are not filled with careers that would be a certification would put them in and put the kids into career opportunities where they could buy a home, where they start at $75,000 a year, and those are in my district. Those are technical jobs that they just need a certification, and I do see that we have businesses that are starting to understand that and certify themselves, but I don't think it's businesses' sole responsibility to fill their own jobs. I think that we have a responsibility to the children that we educate to create those jobs, to create those opportunities for them. You know, I look at my Workforce Investment Board. They've done a fantastic job connecting education with aerospace or with medical industry and all these other things. I will say this. Well, I say two things. One, I think the studies show that career technical education have encouraged students to have a reason to go to school. It's applicable. They see when their skills. We say this in my district. I have EA Sports. And we always say math leads to Madden. If more of my kids knew that going to math class would lead them to be able to create games like Madden, they'd show up. And so I don't see it as a limited opportunity, career technical education. I see it as an opportunity to keep kids engaged, to keep young people engaged, and to watch them move into the next space of their lives. And whether that is a career or whether that is the next level of education, I think it's vitally important to us that all of our students get the opportunity to do that, whether we are in disadvantaged communities or in communities in which there are just job opportunities. I do have one question, and I do two questions, actually. One, I am concerned about what Assemblymember O'Donnell mentioned about making sure that it's a regional approach, but also I'm trying to make sure I understand. I might have misheard you, and so I want to make sure I understand the process by which the governor's proposal is dividing up this money. Mm-hmm. So are you saying that the money will be divided equally over each consortium, or how? Explain to me exactly how you see this working, because I heard grant program, but then I heard you say that we were moving away from the grant model, and I just want to make sure I understand 100% before we move forward. Sure. Thank you.
So the funding is allocated to the Chancellor's Office, who will then use a formula to distribute it down to the consortia. So the formula is based on the unemployment rate in the region, the projected job openings in the region, and the 7 through 12 ADA in the region. So each region's consortium allocation will vary based on that formula. So it's not a set. Yes. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Marisucci.
Thank you. So some of my colleagues know that I sat on the Board of Trustees of a JPA Career Technical Education, the Southern California Regional Occupational Center located in my district in Torrance. And I can attest to a lot of what my colleagues have already talked about, the value of not only the career technical education, but the linked learning aspect of it, of making sure that there is we're teaching solid reading and math skills as part of the teaching of these work skills. So based on my experience, I have two concerns or two questions. One is the LAO's written analyses talk about school districts applying for the governor's proposed grants that would be issued through the consortia, but will JPAs also be able to apply for these funds? And second, are there regulations that exist or that are in the trailer language or anywhere else as that defines how these regional consortia are governed?
apologize for having my back to you in my response, but it's a little bit of an awkward setup here. So JPAs are eligible. It's the same eligibility pool as under CTE incentive grants. So school districts, county offices, charters, ROPs, and JPAs are eligible. JPAs do have a lower match under our proposal, so it's a 1-to-1 rather than the 2-to-1 for the other applicants. And I apologize. I forgot your
the second question. Yeah. Are there regulations that describe how these regional consortia are to be governed?
So each of the regional consortia have to do a regional plan, and in that plan they describe their governance model. So that is something that's decided locally by the region, but it is described in their plans.
So to follow up on that, I mean, if the funds are going to be, as you indicated, passed through the Chancellor's office to the consortia, what would prevent? Number one, it sounds like different consortia will be governed according to their own rules, and so each consortia will look different. What is to prevent, consortia from having, some bias either for programs that are administered by their local community college as opposed to the local school districts? It just seems like if we're going to be creating a new level of governance through these regional consortia, then it's important that we have some uniform rules that would allow for those grants to be distributed fairly and not controlled or biased toward, the local community college and their programs. I just would like more assurance that these grants would be, administered fairly and that that there'd be some basic rules as to how this is going to work.
Mr. Marisucci, if I may, if you could just briefly respond to that. That's a very complicated answer, I think, and that's what I hit on earlier. I think we're really going to have to dive into that in budget sub 2 for sure, because I don't understand it. Yeah. I think they're going to explain it again, and I don't understand it. I understand they told Ms. Burke they're going to give the money to consortium. My challenge is, how's the consortium going to deliver it? Exactly. So I don't want to get too far into that right now. If you could just give a short answer, because we do have Mr. Kiley, and we're running significantly behind
sure.
Right now.
I'll just point out that under the existing program in statute, there are requirements that the consortium collaborate with various different entities. So institutions of higher education in their region, LEAs, civic leaders, there's a whole host. So it's not necessarily a community college decision within the consortium. It really is a broad spectrum of stakeholders at that point.
Thank you. Mr. Kiley will be our last question for this panel.
Thank you. I have a question for Ms. Collins. So the LAO's recommendation is that we take kind of the LCFF approach to CTE. Can you explain a little more what that would entail? You're basically recommending that we just augment the funding to whatever degree, and then see how they do by the college and career readiness indicator.
Thank you for the question. Essentially, what we recommend is taking the LCFF approach, which provides 16% more funding than the middle school base rate, to account for the higher costs of things like career technical education and college preparedness. This was the original approach that the state determined it wished to take for CTE back in 2012 or 2013-14 when we adopted the local control funding formula. The thought would be that for many of the categorical programs, gifted and talented, for example, CTE, that instead of having distinct earmarked funding for those programs that would require districts to perform a lot of compliance-based activities that created inequitable funding across district based on historical variables, that the LCFF approach would provide more funding to students based on whether they were low-income English learners or foster youth. And the thought was, instead of deciding here in Sacramento what local priorities would be we would allow the locals to decide through the LCAP process, where stakeholders, including parents and teachers and others, would come to the table and determine how they would serve students to be not only college and career ready, but also engaged. And we have 8 state priorities that we wanted school districts to address. So what our recommendation is for many of the reasons that some of the members brought up today, concerns that not everybody is going to apply for a grant, for example, what our recommendation is through the LCFF, the expectation is that everyone performs college and career readiness activities. And we hold everybody accountable, not just those that are receiving funds for it, as we did under the ROCP days, but every high school is held accountable through the new accountability system. The new accountability system has taken a while to roll out. There's some concerns with the indicators. Right. We've had a transition period because we didn't have full implementation of LCFF that provides that extra funding for high schools, or anyone actually. It wasn't fully funded for any grade span. So our recommendation is to continue down that path of requiring everyone to provide career technical education and holding them accountable for it.
So I guess the issue is that the way the indicator is currently written is it doesn't necessarily do that, right? There's you can satisfy this indicator through a variety of means that don't necessarily include any vocational offering at all. Is that right?
Yes, we agree that if the legislature has concerns with that it could make adjustments to the indicator. The state board is planning to add over the next 3 years more career education metrics into the indicator, including work-based learning and certificates. But we believe that if the legislature has those concerns, it has the power to make recommendations to address that very concern, because that's a concern we've heard as well. But I would note that while this is our recommendation, we recognize that there is significant interest in creating a categorical and an earmarked program. And that's why in our analysis we provided some recommendations for how you might structure that. We think that accountability, even if you take the categorical route, is really important in improving accountability. And if you take the LCFF route, we have some ideas for improvement as well, including longer-term indicators. We right now don't know, after a student completes high school, if they go into a community college, into a four-year, into an apprenticeship program. So we think at the very least those types of improvements could be made no matter what approach you decide to take.
Right. Yeah, I guess that's what I see as the tension here is that, separate from the question of accountability, we don't really seem to have any vision as to what the appropriate, end goal is. We seem to have some agreement more CTE would be good. But does that mean that every student should have some exposure to it? Does that mean that every student should have a variety of career offerings within their district or within their region? And there doesn't seem to be any consensus on that, and yet we're debating sort of what's the best funding mechanism towards an undefined goal. So I don't know if the governor's office has an answer to that as to kind of what our vision is here. But the other point I'll add is that I think that, Dr. Weber's comments are worth taking really seriously. And part of the reason for that is this would be a different conversation if we're sitting in a state that has the best K-12 education in the country. And we do have many, many outstanding schools in this state, but we actually have about the worst performance when it comes to traditional academic indicators in K through 12. And when you're discussing CTE or vocational education in that context, then it almost seems like some are ready to jump at the idea that this is somehow an alternative, and it can't, I don't think, be conceived of that way, that these offerings are vital to have, and I think that every student should have access to vocational education, but it's not a substitute for the basic education that every child in California should be guaranteed, and we're falling far, far short on those more traditional metrics. I guess just, I don't know that the chair wants to move on, but you did talk about some of the metrics we have for how CTE programs are doing. Could you talk about kind of what those are, and then whether you've noticed whether there's any correlation between districts that do well by traditional academic K-12 metrics and those that do well with CTE, or are those not necessarily correlated?
Sure. Briefly, please, because we do have a hearing coming in here not too long, and we're way behind.
So the point I was actually making in my testimony is that we've provided over $1.4 billion in CTE funding through these two two short-term programs since 2013, and we actually don't have the long-term data that, as the legislative analyst had mentioned. We've had reporting requirements in both statutes governing both programs, and we do not have those specific outcome measures to point to, and that's the reason why we're structuring our proposal to use the launch board, because that has shown success in being able to track community college students back through high school and into the workforce. And we believe that by including this data on the launch board, it will potentially expand the availability of metrics to build out that indicator.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your participation, your information, and you got a lot of members out here today, so thank you. Now, to me, this issue is about skill development, enrichment, and ultimately leads to academic success and job success. So I think it's pretty much a no-brainer as to why we're here today and why we're pushing this forward. In a classroom you can memorize your fractions, but in the real world you can apply them. I think that's what this is really about. So thank you.